Welcome, everyone. It's just a pleasure for me to do this today. I spend almost all of my time working with SQL. Um, it's a very powerful language. We're often asked to do things that it wasn't really designed to do. Um, Sometimes doing things that perhaps would have been better done in C# or one of the other structured languages out there. One of the other object-oriented languages, but we do it in, we find that we can often solve the problems within SQL and not have to go out to those types of other programming languages. Today, I'm going to share 5 tips with you that are things that I use every day. These are not beginner pieces, but they're not really advanced either. If you're currently one of our clients and you're not using SQL, but would like to for your report writing and data analysis, give us a call and we'll set up some training and get you the basics so that you can get started with it. It's that important. When I first started in data analysis, I was a Crystal report writer, and I didn't have that SQL knowledge in the background, and I had to do some incredibly complex things with the data, and it was virtually impossible to do it in Crystal reports. Later, we moved on to SSRS, and again, with SQL, you can structure the data in a manner that best suits you, and really manipulate the data in ways that allow you to view the reports faster and much more efficiently than if you had done the work exclusively in SSRS or Crystal reports. Some of the things that I'm going to be showing you today are very powerful, but they take a little longer for the programming aspect of it. And I want you to always remember that your job as a programmer is not to be an extremely fast programmer. That's certainly a well-earned title, but to build a very efficient code is the issue. The first item I'm going to be talking about is temporary staging tables. Often, and I wish I had the example here in front of me, but I'm on a different system. Often we can take queries that literally take hours to run, and by using judicious use of these temporary staging tables, we can get them to run in minutes or even seconds. A good example of that is the one I'm talking about, where in the from clause were literally a dozen or more sub-select statements. That report would take 12 hours to run. We removed all the sub-selects and installed instead temporary staging tables, which you can see here we're using in this report to gather the data together in sets. And we took that report from running in 12 hours to running in 12 seconds. It was a massive win for us and for the agency. The report that somebody would have to plan on starting before they left work at night and coming back to view it the next day, they could run it whenever they wanted to. That's your job as a programmer, as a SQL programmer, is to do that, is to make these queries run as efficiently as possible. In this case, you can see that we've got a couple of temporary tables. We have this temp.payer date up here and temp.ar. The first statement that we make, we always install this on for a temporary table is we need to make sure that the table doesn't exist to start with, because we're using an into statement to build it. So what that statement is saying is, I want you to create a table for me. And so in this case, I'm bringing in something called a payer type and a month start date. It's very simple. We just put it into that. This will delete the table if it already exists. It then will then build the table fresh with new data. And so we set that aside. So the next one we're coming to, again, temp.ar. We're going to gather all this data together in a set, put it into the temp.ar table, and set it aside. It's been grouped. We've done an order by on it. Then we take those two tables and we bring them together in our third set, which is the data set that we wanted, that we're going to view. This is going into a table that will then be accessed with Excel or with a stored procedure, or excuse me, with SSRS. And that's a very popular method of doing it. It's called a data mart, and that's what we're building, is a data mart here called AR Measures. And we're going to be talking about data marts in just a few minutes. That's another one of our secrets for getting the data. So that's how it is. But let's build out a query where we're gathering the data. And this brings us to our second step, or our second tip, which is finding clients in your system with missing data, or finding anything with missing data. And what I mean by that, in this case, our agency has come to us and said, what we're looking for is, every one of our clients has a self-pay record, but we want to find the clients that only have a self-pay record. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we're going to use temporary staging tables, and our first table is going to collect the data for all the clients that have something other than our self-pay records. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So we're going to, the first thing is get our statement here to drop the table if it already exists. And we'll call this temp dot insurance.
We did have a question. It just said, isn't drop table if easier? And you know, it may be. We have used this structure for so long that I think I have it as a macro on my computer, and it's just in our brains, and it's so easy, and we copy and paste. So if you have another technique that you like better, by all means use that to drop your staging tables.
So we drop our table, and now let's gather a list. What we're looking for is a list of clients who have an insurance other than self-pay. So we'll bring them in now, and we're going to I just do this so that it'll autofill. So that's the reason I just used the star there. We're going to go back and fix that in just a second.
You know, and Gary does a nice job on his SQL, and he's pretty fastidious about his formatting. And these are topics that we could cover in future webinars. Or if you're, like I said, if you're interested in ever some time just talking about formatting, feel free to anytime contact us. But it is kind of an art in itself.
Yeah, and I use it, Sean, one of the main reasons I use it is you'll see mine looks different than almost anybody else's out there. And that way, if I open a query, I can tell if I wrote it or not instantly, but it's readable. Let me give this an alias. It'll make it a little faster for us here. We'll give that to CID. And come here, CID dot. And we're going to use the client key. The client ID is protected health information. The client key in our systems is fluid. It's a dynamic value that can change from day to day, and so it's not protected.
It's while he's typing, I'll tell you, we call it a key, a surrogate key in the data warehouse world. We do a lot with data warehousing, and so there's a lot of advantages to using that surrogate key, like Gary said.
I'm just going to open this up real quick to get a value that I need. Whoops, it's the wrong one. And let's see what that does for us. Okay, so that gives us a list of keys. Now you can see we've got some that repeat. And so we want to keep this list as small as possible. So we'll put a group by in there to get rid of that. Okay, so now we have our list of everyone who has something besides self-pay. Because remember, what we're looking for here is we want a list of clients that only have self-pay. So we've put them into this query. Now let's make this a table. Execute that. And you can see we've got 37,260 rows. Now let's build our list of clients. And in this case, we're going to build this as a query so that it delivers the data back. It doesn't put it into a data mart. It's just going to deliver the data back to us. So we're going to select, first of all, we'll just put star for a second. That'll let us fill this in with autofill. And this is where we get this. Now I always start with 1 equals 1, and then I can put and down here. And that way, if I have a whole list of stuff in my where clause, I can just comment out any one item in there that I want to. And CID dot client key is not in. temp.insurance. So now what we've said here is we're going to just take, we would probably have other stuff here, but we're just going to get the client key in this case. So now what we've said is give us everybody that's not in this list above. The list above, remember, contains clients who had everything except self-pay. And this will then give us everybody who only has self-pay. So it's a very useful trick. We come down here, we fire it off.
While that's running, we have another question. It says, most temporary tables I've encountered we're creating using the pound sign for naming. Is using temp more of an industry standard? And you're absolutely right. And maybe you can talk to that, Gary, but we do that a lot. We do that pound sign thing a lot. And you can say why, Gary.
Right. Well, it's only used in stored procedures, which is one of the reasons that we use stored procedures so much, is that we do use it in there. But I generally build my stored procedure with using temp tables so that I can look at the data. I can physically go and look at it in the table structure. And then when I'm done, I'll switch it over to the pound sign.
It's a good question.
Very good question. You also don't have to worry about dropping the table ahead of time because it won't exist. When you use a dynamic temp table in a stored procedure, it also limits its scope to that stored procedure. So let me give you a good example. I had a report that I wrote before knowing about dynamic temp tables and was using temp tables throughout, and now with drop temp table. But the problem is that this report would be run by several people at the same time. It was a productivity report or something along that line where they were looking at their own data. And so what would happen is someone would start theirs off and it would start building temp tables. Somebody else would start theirs and it would drop those temp tables and start the others. So I had to switch those over to the dynamic temp tables. So great question. And this is taking longer than I thought it would. Let's just see if we can get the top 100 or so here.
There we go. It finished. Oh, you canceled it. Okay. So yeah, we could, we could spend some time, like I said, on a future webinar, talking about formatting and talking about kind of structuring the query language for efficiency and kind of developing your own style. And that's kind of how we can kind of tell who's coded what a little bit. It's some slight differences in the syntax. So, and some of the new tools, I think Azure Data Studio has some advanced, and I think SQL Management Studio as well has some tools for refactoring and reformatting those items. So
this is taking longer than I thought it would.
Well, now one thing we could do is, well, you've got your temp insurance in there. Maybe run them separately. Maybe they're the query plans running into each other or something.
That's a possibility.
That runs pretty fast.
Yeah.
We'll just run that. Yeah, that is taking a minute to run. It's potentially millions of rows on each side. But what that would get you, and explain why you do that, Gary, what you're doing is you're looking for exceptions, right? And you don't want to create Cartesian products, and maybe maybe explain what a Cartesian product is, or duplicate rows, I guess is a better way to.
Right. Well, in this case, we have duplicate rows because every client, whether they perhaps have Medicaid and Medicare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, but they all also have self-pay. So if I search for clients that have self-pay, I'll get all these clients that have everything else as well. And that's not what we're after here. We're after only the clients that have the I wonder if that table is not indexed. That's probably what's going on here.
Well, while it's running, maybe we could go to the next tip.
Let's do that. Let's do that. Let's talk about
we're going to talk about limiting columns, right?
Right. We've had this happen with consultants that work with us where they bring in all of the fields from a table in order to just grab whatever the one or two items that they need. Now I'm going to show you what that looks like. So in this case, I'm going to take the top 100,000 rows from the client visit dimension. This is a credible system, by the way. And we'll click execute. And if we look down here at the bottom, you can see the amount of time that it's taking to run. So 15 seconds to gather that data because we've brought in all of the columns. Now, if I go to, where is 10? If on the other hand, I select just these 4 columns that I really need for my report, instead of grabbing everything and then in my report grabbing just the ones I need, but structure my query so that I only bring in the items that I need, will bring in the same 100,000 rows. And you can see that only took 2 seconds to run. So that's a quick tip, but it's very powerful. And it's a mistake that I see a lot of people using, where they build these massive queries that kind of contain everything, and then they try to run that for all of their reports and just gathering the data that they want for their report out of that massive query. And I've even seen that done by the EMRs, where they'll build a view for you to report out of, but it contains all the data in the system essentially. And it's impossible for it to run in a reasonable length of time. So you can see here's a quick way to limit the amount of data that you're bringing in. Now, where was our?
Well, and another
Okay.
tip is, like, don't do select star, right? That's what you're saying. A lot of
Exactly
people just like select star.
Select star. The reason I had those all listed is because I wanted to get rid of the client ID. Otherwise, I would have just used the select star, and it would run in the same length of time I tested it. So this is run. It took 1 minute and 46 seconds to deliver back our data. But what I would do with this is, instead of putting this query in as part of the data set itself in SSRS or as in a Crystal report, instead I want to put this into a stored procedure. The reason I want the stored procedure is then I can do all kinds of things with it. Not only can I use temp tables, which I can't use in a view, but I can use variables. I can put parameters on it. I can do anything I want to. And so this is the staple of our report writing, is building stored procedures that deliver back the data. Now, this is for data that the report's going to be run once a day or once a week, once a month, that kind of thing. It's not something where the report is being run 100 times a day. I'm going to show you in the next step what that is. A lot of people ask, well, I don't know how to create a stored procedure. I'll show you how simple it is. I copied my data from this query. I go to stored procedures and right click, go new, stored procedure. And I get this little template that comes up. You'll see right here is a select statement. All I have to do is highlight that, hit Control V, and my query is there. I'm not going to put any parameters in this one, but you can easily do that. You can put in a parameter, and let's give this a name.
While he's typing that too, stored parameters are so powerful. You can do dynamic SQL. There's a lot of problems that Gary has solved that were just not doable any other way than with a stored procedure using what we call dynamic SQL.
Right, and that is some pretty advanced stuff, but we have done it for some things that were extremely complicated to do, and it's in our profiler system. It's how we build our assessments and UDDs, is using dynamic SQL to do that, and it's more advanced than we can get into here today. But if you'd like to see some of that, let me know, and I can schedule something and show you how that how dynamic SQL works. But so we've just taken our thing here, we set it in, we hit execute. Now that doesn't execute the process to make it run. All that does is it compiles the stored procedure. We come over here to stored procedures, hit refresh, and there's our CDW self-pay. We hit execute, and that'll take a minute and a half or so to run because it's running all that query. So any questions about stored procedures? And perhaps in another webinar, we can get into doing parameters and variables and things like that, and maybe even talk about dynamic SQL and how it's used. That would take an entire webinar on its own. So with that, let's take and look at our last tip, which is using data marts. Now, if I have a data set that's going to be accessed a dozen times a day, 100 times a day, I'm going to build what's called a data mart. And a data mart is nothing more than a table. In this case, this is our answer question file from Credible. It uses 9 tables to build that out. And it takes a while to run, to build out all of there's literally millions of rows of data in this. It builds out a very useful data set which I have here, which has our questions, answers, form version. It has the service time in and out. I've removed, it also has the client ID, the first and last name of the client, and the client's age at the date of that the assessment or UDD was given. And that's all put into this data mart, which is then used for multiple reports that are used throughout the day. People are looking for assessments and doing various things. We've just taken the data from this complex query and using a stored procedure, it's loaded into a data mart. You see that's preceded by the scheme, the DM schema, into the answer question file. And so this is what I would do if I had data that, as I said before, where it's going to be accessed multiple times a day. I'm going to put it into a data mart so that all these queries and all of these joins and CPU cycles can be done once in the middle of the night, and then that data is sitting there the rest of the day waiting to just be extracted using a select statement with SQL. So that's it for today's.
And
Yeah,
I was
did
just,
you want to add something?
yeah, I was
Sean?
just going to say, you know, these data marts, and we could talk about, this is another topic on the SQL query engine and the way that SQL processes queries. You know, it has a very definite stepwise process: from, on, outer, where, group by. You know, there's about 9 steps, and that's very important to understand that. And Gary kind of said that, you know, if you have a bunch of joins, as you see there, every join is expensive, right? Every join is expensive in a relational database. So when Gary builds this data mart, it makes it often thousands of times faster to execute the queries against those data marts, especially if it's indexed and optimized. But a real time saver. So yeah, that's a wonderful tip, Gary. Building kind of a focused subject matter, focused data mart. That's excellent.
Yeah. So that's all I had for today. Any questions, please?
Yeah, let's have some questions. Anybody want to ask anything? And really, let me show my screen again. Let's see. I'll kind of summarize these a little bit. So to summarize, we've got we've got these five tips. Let's see. Make sure I'm showing the right screen here. Oh, we have a question. What is the difference between a data mart and an SQL view, Gary? That's a good question.
Very good question. An SQL view means that we have to process these joins every time we access the view. Views are very inefficient for that reason. A view doesn't store the data that's in it. It simply fires off this query every time you access it. And that is very expensive in CPU cycles. So your best bet is to always put it into a table called a data mart, and stick it there to the side of your data warehouse and use it that way.
Especially if you have 5,000 rows, it probably doesn't make that much difference. But if you have 100,000 or 1,000,000, it makes a
oh yeah, this
difference.
particular table has millions and millions of rows. There's a row for every question and every answer on every assessment, progress note, everything, every form in Profiler or in Credible, excuse me.
Any other questions? So I to summarize just up on my screen here. So, temporary staging tables, that's a big win for speed. And that's really kind of what we're getting at is how do we make our queries fast, right? And we run across queries all the time where people have done sub-selects and people are like, well, I don't want to do all that temporary table stuff. And it's like, well, okay, but your query will run really slow if you do a bunch of subqueries at all. And if you understand the way SQL executes your query, the from clause is the very first one. So if you have a big from clause, it's got to build a giant table: from, on, outer, where, group by, all those. And your select, I think, is your second to last, maybe, and then top is your final step. So these temporary staging tables are a huge deal. And it's kind of there's a school of thought in the SQL world that's set theory, set programming, and Gary alluded to that at the start. And it's very, very popular because it's so fast. The others is gaps and exceptions. So Gary talked about how to find missing data, right? And that's very important because you're constantly like, well, who didn't get this, or who doesn't have this, or who doesn't have that? Limiting columns, as he showed, using stored procedures and data marts. So those are 5 things that Gary has talked about that are huge, right there. Right, Gary? Easy to implement.
Absolutely.
As well.
And if you ever have, if you're a client and you want more information about any of these items, where you think maybe we can speed up one of your queries by using some of these tips, let me know and we'll get together and talk about it. So Thank you for your time today, everyone. We certainly appreciate you coming and participating in this. We've had some great questions today, and I appreciate those as well.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Our contact information is on the screen, and please contact us for anything that we can assist you with. We look forward to talking again soon. Thank you.